Every word you speak out loud is a repetition your brain logs as instruction. That sentence sounds like something from a Sunday sermon. It's also a finding from peer-reviewed clinical research on self-directed neuroplasticity. And the overlap between those two worlds is far more precise than either side wants to admit. Genesis opens with language as a creative act. God speaks and matter follows. Let there be light, and light appears. The entire creation narrative is built on a single mechanism, declared words producing physical reality. For centuries, theologians treated this as metaphor, as divine poetry. Then brain imaging technology arrived. Jeffrey Schwartz at UCLA spent the 1990s studying patients with obsessive-compulsive disorder. He asked them to do something deceptively simple. When an intrusive thought appeared, they were to speak a specific reframing phrase out loud. "That's my OCD. That's a brain glitch. I'm choosing to redirect." Weeks later, the PET scans showed something the research team initially questioned. The metabolic activity in the caudate nucleus, the region driving the compulsive loop, had physically shifted. The structure of the brain had changed. Through spoken words directed at the self, this is where the parallel gets uncomfortable for skeptics on both sides. The biblical tradition says your tongue holds the power of life and death, Proverbs 18 verse 20-1. Neuroscience says repeated verbalization rewires synaptic density over time. The vocabulary is different. The mechanism described is the same. So why does speaking out loud carry more weight than thinking silently? Your auditory cortex activates when you hear your own voice. That means spoken self-talk creates a dual encoding, the motor act of speaking plus the sensory act of hearing. 2 channels of input instead of 1. Brain imaging studies on self-talk show that vocalized statements generate stronger activation patterns than internalized ones. You're essentially running the signal through the system twice. The Book of Romans puts it bluntly: faith comes by hearing. The writer couldn't have known about dual encoding, but the instruction is acoustically precise. Speak it so you can hear it. The hearing changes you. Now consider the structure of biblical declarations. They almost always use present tense. I am the Lord who heals you. The Lord is my shepherd. I can do all things. These are stated as current reality, even when circumstances say otherwise. A psychologist would call this implementation in tension with identity framing. You're declaring who you are in the present as settled fact. B.J. Fogg's behavioral research at Stanford showed that identity-based statements reshape behavior far more effectively than goal-based ones. I am a runner changes your morning routine faster than I want to run more. The biblical authors were writing identity prescriptions thousands of years before the clinical term existed. But repetition is the engine underneath all of this. Deuteronomy 6 instructs the reader to repeat God's words when sitting down, when walking, when lying down, when rising up. That covers the entire waking cycle. Modern spaced repetition research confirms that distributing verbal rehearsal across the day produces stronger memory consolidation than a single session. The ancient instruction reads like a clinical protocol disguised as a commandment, and the mechanism runs deeper than memory. Repeated spoken statements affect what researchers call the reticular activating system, the filter that decides which incoming information reaches your conscious awareness. Speak a declaration enough times and your brain starts scanning the environment for evidence that matches. You don't just believe differently, you literally perceive differently. Objects, opportunities, conversations that were always present become visible because the filter changed its criteria. This is where faith traditions describe something they call seeing with spiritual eyes. The language is religious, the process is perceptual filtering, and it's measurable. Your spoken words adjust the threshold for what your brain flags as relevant. A person who repeats, "Doors are opening for me," will notice opportunities. A person rehearsing, "Nothing ever works," will walk straight past, same environment. Same day, different perceptual filter, different lived experience. Critics will push back here, and they should. Positive declarations alone don't cure disease, don't pay rent, don't undo structural injustice. The prosperity gospel crowd has weaponized speak it into existence into a kind of magical thinking that ignores action entirely. That's a genuine distortion. Schwartz's patients didn't just speak, they redirected behavior after speaking. The biblical model pairs declaration with action repeatedly. Joshua is told to meditate on the Lord day and night, then to be strong and courageous, meaning move, act, do something with what you've declared. The words prime the system. The behavior completes the circuit. Here's where the neuroscience gets granular. When you speak a future state declaration, I am confident, I am capable, I walk in abundance, your brain generates a prediction error. Current experience doesn't match the statement. That mismatch creates tension, and the brain hates unresolved tension. So it does one of two things. It dismisses the statement as false, or it begins adjusting behavior and perception to close the gap. Which path it takes depends almost entirely on repetition and emotional conviction. Sporadic, flat declarations get dismissed. Consistent, emotionally engaged declarations get treated as a target state the brain actively works toward. The biblical tradition understood the emotional component intuitively. Declarations in Scripture are almost always tied to intense emotional contexts: worship, crisis, battle, deliverance. The Psalms are the clearest example. David doesn't recite declarations in a monotone. He cries out, he weeps, he shouts. The emotional intensity isn't theatrical excess. It's the activation energy the brain requires to prioritize a new instruction over an existing pattern. There's a phrase that appears dozens of times across both testaments. Do not fear. It shows up in Isaiah, in Luke, in Revelation. The standard reading treats this as comfort. The neuroscience reading treats it as a direct instruction to interrupt the stress response through spoken counterstatement. When fear activates the body's threat circuitry, a spoken declaration of safety doesn't just feel comforting, it sends a competing signal that over time weakens the automatic fear response through a process called extinction learning. The ancient command and the clinical technique are structurally identical. So where does this leave someone who sits between faith and skepticism? Probably in the most productive place possible. You don't need to resolve the theological question to use the mechanism. The brain responds to repeated, emotionally charged, present-tense spoken declarations by reorganizing its filtering and behavioral systems. That's the clinical finding. Whether the reason it works is because neural tissue follows physical laws of adaptation, or because a creator designed neural tissue to respond to spoken word, the practical instruction is the same. Speak what you're becoming, in present tense, with conviction, repeatedly across the full arc of your day. Then act in the direction of what you've declared. The writer of Hebrews defined faith as the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Substance. Evidence. Those are material words, physical words. A brain scan of someone who has spent 6 months in consistent spoken declaration shows measurable structural change, new synaptic density, altered blood flow patterns, shifted perceptual thresholds. Substance you can photograph. Evidence that shows up on a screen. The oldest book in your tradition and the newest paper in the journal are describing the same remodeling project. One calls it faith. The other calls it self-directed neuroplasticity. The blueprint reads the same either way, and your voice is the tool that breaks ground.